Why do you believe these core tenets of Christian orthodoxy to be in jeopardy based on the scribal errors you discovered in the biblical manuscripts? Notice they're not asking, do you believe these core tenets to be in jeopardy? They're asking, why do you believe? In other words, the way they read his book is the way hundreds of thousands of college students and others have read his book. Namely, that Bart Ehrman is saying that the core tenets of orthodoxy, of the Christian faith, are in jeopardy by these textual variants. He even sounded like he was saying that earlier. Here's his answer. Essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament. Page 252, misquoting Jesus of the paperback version.
Hey everyone, what you just heard was Dr. Daniel Wallace defending the text of the Bible through manuscripts, and he highlights this specific passage from Bart Ehrman's book where he himself tells us that there's no significant variants or errors in the biblical text that take away from the foundations of the Christian faith. So the rest of this video, we're going to see Dr. Daniel walk us through 4 specific questions that help us understand in much more depth the issues, variants, or structures within all the manuscripts we have for the Christian Bible. And it's going to strengthen and encourage your faith. I guarantee it. So I look forward to watching this with you all and making some comments throughout the video. Let's go.
4 questions that we want to answer. So 2 attitudes to avoid, 4 questions to answer. How many textual variants are there? I'll even define what a textual variant is. What kinds of textual variations are there? That is, are they the kind that are the difference between celebrate and celibate? Are they something that's far less significant, far more significant? What kinds of variations? What's the nature of these differences? What theological beliefs depend on textually suspect passages? This, of course, is something that Al-Azami and others have said that, gee, the early church just corrupted the copies of the New Testament that they had, and we can't tell what the original said, but it certainly doesn't affirm things like the deity of Christ in the original. And finally, kind of the capstone question of all of this is, has the essence of the Christian faith been corrupted by the scribes? Start with question number 1 then. How many variants do we have? Well, there's one way to measure this that Bart has been fond of saying, and this is one of the times that he actually understates the situation. Words in the New Testament. There are approximately 138,000 words in the Greek New Testament. Or if you were Brother Andrew, he would say there are 138,162 words in the Greek New Testament, because that's what shows up in our standard text today. So 138,000 words in the New Testament. What Bart likes to say is there are more variants in the manuscripts than there are words in the New Testament. That's a big understatement. The latest figures are that we have about 500,000 textual variants in the manuscripts. Just the Greek manuscripts we're talking about, not other languages. The New Testament was translated into several different languages. We have quotations by it by people known as church fathers, patristic quotations. Just the manuscripts alone, we have far more variants than we do have words in the original.
Hey everyone, Dr. Daniel's about to walk us through all the different numbers of manuscripts that we have, but I wanted to show this chart first because it can be really helpful as we move forward. He's going to talk about that New Testament down at the very bottom of this. You'll see that we have 5,600 copies on this chart. He shows us how it's been adjusted slightly in a couple minutes when we watch the video, but this is a list of all of these different ancient authors and writers and the numbers of copies and manuscripts we have from them, as well as how far the original date of the writings would have occurred and when the most recent copy of that writing is that we have. And so you can see, for example, that Plato, we have the closest copy to when he lived to what we have of his writings is 1,200 years later. And if you look down at the New Testament manuscripts, less than 100 years from the actual events, all with 99.5% accuracy. And so as he walks through these texts, you're going to see him talk about how many manuscripts we have, the number of manuscripts that we have, and shed a light on the importance of recognizing the differences, but also the accuracy here of the statement. So I hope that this chart is helpful for you with the rest of the information that Dr. Daniel is going to share with us.
In Greek alone, the official number is 5,865. Now, I need to adjust that to about 5,500 because that official number, which comes out of Münster, Germany, there's an institute that's the official cataloger of these manuscripts. They recognize that some of these manuscripts have disappeared, and some of these manuscripts are actually a part of another manuscript that each section got a different catalog number. I won't get into the details, but basically we have about 5,500 Greek New Testament manuscripts. So if you're at Starbucks tomorrow and somebody says, I heard that we had 5,865 Greek New Testament manuscripts, you'll say, no, that's really the number is about 5,500. You can correct them. And I'm sure anybody who goes to Starbucks is acquainted with these numbers. That's what the New Testament was originally written in, Greek. We're talking about manuscripts prior to the time of the printing press and the first published Greek New Testament on a printing press, which was 1516. The New Testament immediately spread throughout the ancient world, and by the end of the 2nd century, we believe, it was translated into Latin. And Latin started to take off. It became the lingua franca of all of Europe, and so we actually have more manuscripts in Latin than we do in Greek of the New Testament. About 10,000 Latin manuscripts. Not only that, but the New Testament was translated into a number of other languages. Coptic, which is an ancient language, it's Egyptian hieroglyphics put into Greek letters with a few extra letters just thrown in for fun and to confuse modern students who are trying to figure out the verb system of Coptic. I'm not going to speak any further from personal experience, but it's been a royal pain. So we have Latin manuscripts, we have Coptic, we have Syriac, we have Armenian, Arabic, we have Hebrew manuscripts, Old Church Slavonic, Georgian, Gothic. There's a lot of different languages that the New Testament was translated into before the time of the printing press. And conservatively, we could say there are between 5,000 and 10,000 manuscripts in these other languages. Again, not based on a printed edition. These are all handwritten manuscripts. Now, if you had a magic wand and you could just wipe all of these out in one fell swoop, we would still not be left without a witness. And the reason is because of the church fathers. Starting in the late 1st century, we have church fathers who comment on the New Testament. There are even 1 or 2 fathers who may have written their works before the New Testament was completed. So they comment on the New Testament, and as time goes on, they write more and more comments. They would write whole treatises on the book of Romans. Origen, for example, 3rd century, middle of the 3rd century, wrote a 15-volume commentary on Paul's letter to the Romans. We don't have the full thing anymore. We have Rufinus's 10-volume abridgment in Latin, are very, very painstakingly accurate. You'll miss something, but the scribe next to you will get it. We can reconstruct that from these variants, from these manuscripts. Another way to look at this is in 1611, the King James Bible came out, and the New Testament was essentially based on 8 manuscripts. And of those 8, 3 were really heavily used. 100 years earlier by the first published Greek New Testament done by a man named Erasmus. 3 manuscripts. The oldest of these was 11th century, and he didn't trust that one very much because he thought it was more corrupt. He didn't know how old it was. He had no idea how to date it. Now, in 2018, we have 5,500 manuscripts plus, and our oldest go back to the 2nd century. So as time goes on, we're actually getting closer and closer to the original text, not farther away. Okay, that's question number 1. Number 2, what kinds of textual variations are there? And I'll be much faster about the rest of these. But I wanted to talk to you about the variants and the manuscripts. It's such important evidence to think about. Well, I could break this down into several different categories, but I can simplify it this way. Over 99% make virtually no difference at all. For example, there are spelling differences in the manuscripts that really affect nothing. There are so many different kinds of things that don't get translated, difference in word order, spelling differences, other things. And so I have a question for you Greek geeks. How many ways are there to say John loves Mary in ancient Greek? Well, let me give you some issues. Now, if you don't know Greek, you still need to write the answers down because this will show up on the exam tomorrow. There's word order differences. Greek can put it in any order it wants. John loves Mary, Mary loves John, loves Mary, John loves John, Mary. It doesn't matter because Greek is a highly inflected language. You tell what the subject is by the end. You tell what the direct object is by the ending. And the Greek definite article, the word the, occurs with proper names. We don't know exactly why. I wrote my master's thesis on when the article does not appear in Greek. I spent over 1,200 hours writing that thesis. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on when it does appear in Greek. These two works could cure the most hopeless insomniac. We have the article in the Greek New Testament is far more common than any other word. 1 out of 7 words is the in Greek. And we still don't know why it's used with proper names. Although there have been lots of theories, nothing has compelled scholars to believe it one way or another. So you can say, the John loves Mary, the John loves the Mary, John loves the Mary, and it's always translated, John loves Mary. Then there's differences in spelling. For example, the name in John, for John in Greek either has 2 N's in the middle or 1 N. Every time we see it, there are some manuscripts with 2 N's, some with 1. Ioannes or Ioannes. Pronounced the same, spelled differently. So how many ways are there to say John loves Mary in Greek? There's 8 different ways. I had to obviously put this in Greek. If I put this in English, it would say John loves Mary each time, and so you wouldn't get a sense. So you need to, I'll give you a little time to write these down so you have the data. It's not just this number of ways. There's another 8 ways to say John loves Mary. Same word for loves each time, and it's always translated John loves Mary. It's not Mary is loved by John. Every verse, every sentence, is translated John loves Mary. And some more ways, and more. I can assure you these are all different. This took me 8 hours one day to come up with this. So I hope you appreciate this. Yeah, I'm anal like Brother Andrew, I know. 96 ways to say John loves Mary in Greek without changing the basic meaning at all. But there's also conjunctions that are often untranslated that go along with sentences like this. And I just picked on a few of them, and so there's some more ways to say John loves Mary. Hold on a second. $384 ways to say John loves Mary in Greek without changing anything. Now, there's actually more ways, but after 8 hours, I felt that I proved my point. These are not all the ways to say John loves Mary in Greek. Other legitimate word orders swell the numbers to over 500, and a different verb for loves now mushrooms the numbers to nearly 1,200. Bart Ehrman said we could go on nearly forever talking about specific places in which the texts of the New Testament came to be changed, either accidentally or intentionally. The examples are not just in the hundreds, but in the thousands. He's absolutely right. And if we talked about these, that would cure the most hopeless insomniac. If we can say John loves Mary over 1,000 times in Greek without substantially changing the meaning, the number of textual variants for the New Testament is meaningless. It's a meaningless number. What counts is the nature of these variants. What really is affected? And the smallest category of variants are those that are both meaningful and viable. That is, they change the meaning to some degree, and they have a good chance of being authentic. That's what we mean by viable. Less than 1/5 of 1% of all textual variants fit this group. Here's a way to represent it. The big blue box is the number of textual variants we have. And when you hear about 500,000 textual variants, this is the way that most people think about it. But let's talk about the ones that are actually significant. It's that little yellow box in the corner. That's what we're really talking about. I am a member of the Society of Biblical Literature. Bart Ehrman is also a member of that, and he has given several lectures there. I've given lectures there as well. And when we have this group of textual scholars to get together and talk about variants, I can assure you we've never talked about this large blue box. We'd get kicked out of the society for doing something so boring. What we're focusing on are those that do change the meaning of the text to some degree. So let me give you a couple of illustrations. Here's one of my favorites, Mark chapter 9, verse 29. Jesus' disciples were trying to cast out some demons, and they were unsuccessful. So he said to them, this kind can only be cast out by prayer and fasting. Or did he just say, by prayer, period? This is the only place in the entire New Testament where and fasting may be part of the original text in the sense of it's a command or a suggestion that you need to fast to do something. So maybe if some of you are involved in exorcisms, you might want to hedge your bet and pray and fast, or you might just pray. Most scholars think the original text ends with prayer, but maybe it also is fasting. And of course, just looking at me, you can tell that I agree with the shorter text, but let's not talk about that further.
Hey everyone, Dr. Daniel's about to dive into the last two questions that he brought up at the beginning. These are crucially important when you're talking to atheists or people from other religious backgrounds that will attack the biblical text and talk about how scribes messed with the writings and took apart the things that it originally intended, or were adding things or subtracting things, changing things, missed things, and that a lot of this had to do with the variants, and that this actually affects core doctrines or true beliefs that we say that we hold today have to do with these errors or issues. And he's going to directly address them and utilize a quote from Bart Ehrman, who is one of the leading atheists within the New Testament scholarship world that attacks a lot of the things that he's going to defend right here. So I hope that this is super helpful for you. It was awesome when I saw this for the first time, and I think it will be enlightening for you all.
Question 3, what theological beliefs depend on textually suspect passages? Well, I go back to Dan Brown in his Da Vinci Code. And he has Sir Lee Teabing say to Sophie, my dear, until that moment in history, Jesus was viewed by his followers as a mortal prophet, a great and powerful man, but a man nonetheless, a mortal. That time in history was when the Council of Nicaea met in AD 325, according to Teabing and Dan Brown. Emperor Constantine was the one who convened it, and then he left and came back towards the end of it later in that summer. So what Dan Brown is saying is that Constantine invented the deity of Christ. We saw that when we already read from M.M. al-Azmi. He believes something similar to that it was the Orthodox Church, the one that came out in the 4th century that finally won the battle against the others, that affirmed a view of the deity of Christ that Christians today would hold to. Remember when I told you an ounce of evidence is worth a pound of presupposition? Here's an ounce of evidence, P66, and that's the first leaf of P66. Did you see it? I hope you wrote it down. You can read along with me if you'd like. In John 1:1. This is a manuscript dated about AD 200, about 125 years older than the Council of Nicaea. So here's what it says. I'll read it real quickly for you. En arche en halagos, kai halagos en proston theon, kai theos en halagos. Or, you probably know it better as, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What P66 says, 125 years before the Council of Nicaea, is what every single manuscript of John's Gospel, no matter the date or the language, says at this place. Jesus is unequivocally called God. The same could be said for the major passages that affirm his deity, his virgin birth, his sinlessness, his death on a cross, his bodily resurrection, and his second coming. And there are none of these places that deny these things. There are some where the textual variant is, it's not an affirmation, but it's also not a denial. You see the difference? That's a very important distinction to make. So we get to our fourth question. In other words, what theological issues are dependent on this? Nothing essential. Maybe whether you should fast when you're doing exorcisms, but not too many other things. Has the essence, our final question, has the essence of the Christian faith been corrupted by the scribes? Sir Frederick Kenyon, who was paleographer extraordinaire and the principal librarian at the British Museum for many, many years, said this about 80 years ago. The general result of all these discoveries, when a lot of these early papyrus discoveries were being made, and all this study is to strengthen the proof of the authenticity of the scriptures and our conviction that we have in our hands in substantial integrity, the veritable Word of God. I think that's a great statement. In substantial integrity, we have in our hands the veritable Word of God. But it's not just a guy like Kenyon who says that. Listen to somebody whom you already know intimately because he was here last week, Bart Ehrman. In his book, Misquoting Jesus, in the paperback edition that came out after about 6 months after the hardback edition, they had an appendix. And on page 252, the editors of this book asked this question: why do you believe these core tenets of Christian orthodoxy to be in jeopardy based on the scribal errors you discovered in the biblical manuscripts? Notice, they're not asking, do you believe these core tenets to be in jeopardy? They're asking, why do you believe? In other words, the way they read his book is the way hundreds of thousands of college students and others have read his book. Namely, that Bart Ehrman is saying that the core tenets of orthodoxy, of the Christian faith, are in jeopardy by these textual variants. He even sounded like he was saying that earlier. Here's his answer. Essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament. Page 252, Misquoting Jesus of the paperback version. Essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament.
Hey guys, I hope that was a super helpful video for you all. I think that there's a lot of solid information that can help you defend your faith, especially when people are attacking manuscripts and errors and all the different things that have to do with the reliability of the biblical text. And I also just am thankful that Dr. Daniel is pointing out Bart Ehrman. If you aren't familiar with him, he is a primary New Testament scholar that regularly attacks the Christian views and is seeking to undermine things. One of the primary things he'll talk about is that Jesus never calls himself God, and he'll point that it's the Gospel of John, which is the latest gospel that we have that affirms or Jesus affirms his own deity, but of biblical literacy and understand the Old Testament in connection to the New Testament, you would recognize quite easily how much in all of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's regularly tying in themes from the Old Testament related to God and deity to things that Jesus himself does, whether it's specifically, you can think in the Gospel of Mark, where he is forgiving people's sins, which is something that only God can do. He is walking on water, which is something only God can do. He is calming the storm, the raging seas, which points us back to the early Genesis text with the chaotic waters that God brings in orders for us to function in reality. And so I think it's really helpful to have this quote from Bart Ehrman himself in his own book telling us that there are no errors, no significant places that contradict our foundational, fundamental faith beliefs. And so super encouraging. I hope that you all enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know in the comments if you'd like more things like this. So I hope you all have a blessed rest of your day.